Welcome to part of our interview series for the Regenerative Medicine Foundation. In the journey of being a patient advocate, I've had the occasion to meet many inspiring patients and families, all dealing with afflictions in one way, shape, or form, some of them chronic, for which there are no treatments and no cures. These narratives, these stories are very important. Advocacy is important because without it, nothing is going to get done. So recently, I've had the good fortune to meet the D'Angelo family. Jeff D'Angelo and his family and his wife founded something called the CHAMP1 Foundation, an extremely rare condition. And Jeff's journey as an advocate and the cause of regenerative medicine and stem cell research is resonating. So I'm very happy to introduce you to Jeff D'Angelo and the CHAMP1 Foundation. And the first question I have, Jeff, is please tell me about JJ.
Sure, and thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak about CHAMP1 in our story. My son JJ is currently 6 years old, but to start from the beginning, my son had a very rough birth. It was an emergency C-section and sort of the opposite experience of what you'd expect as a first-time parent. And right from the very beginning, we knew something wasn't right. And it started with his loss of oxygen at birth. And, you know, this journey we've been on and meeting different specialists and different doctors and trying to find answers was really discouraging and daunting because it seemed like nobody had a clue. And he was originally diagnosed with cerebral palsy. So my wife and I sort of dropped everything and tried to become these experts on different therapies. And we tried traditional and alternative therapies since he was pretty much 3 months old. If it was safe and there's a chance it could help, we were ready to do it. And as things weren't adding up, and my wife and I were doing more and more research, we reached out to this doctor in Connecticut, and he suggested doing an autism and ID panel. And at this point, we were so desperate, we just, whatever you think is best. And we came back and we got this CHAMP1 diagnosis.
Jeff, tell me about JJ and how old is he now? And how did the CHAMP1 condition manifest itself?
So my son currently is 6 years old, and I guess his symptoms are the more common symptoms. All of our children have severe intellectual delay or disability. The majority of the kids are nonverbal or very limited verbal. My son does have a few hundred words. I think we always say, we understand like 80-90% of his language, whereas you might only get half of it. But most of the children display autism symptoms. Some of the kids, there's a subgroup that have epilepsy, cyclical vomiting, and right now they're trying to identify whether or not there's a link between cancer and CHAMP1 as well. Those are some of the more common symptoms, and there are a lot of other ones as well that are not so fun as parents.
After you received the diagnosis that he was suffering from CHAMP1, did you find that this was a rare disease, a rare condition?
Yeah, so the first thing you pretty much do now is you Google it, and we found just a handful of published papers, and they were all on the phenotype of the characterization of the kids, and it's we were in disbelief. So we went on this Facebook group and immediately started talking to these families. And we found out at that point that our son was number 38 in the world.
How did that impact you?
My wife handled it a little better than I did. I was a wreck. It definitely rocked my world. It's something that I've never gone through, and probably in one of the darkest places of my life. And I try not to sulk or kind of feel sorry for myself too long. But it's hard. It's still hard to this day. You just sort of making amends with the life you thought you were going to have, and now sort of moving on with this new life.
So what can you tell me What have you learned about CHAMP1, the CHAMP1 gene?
Sure. So believe it or not, I feel like at this point in research, it's still so early. We've learned a lot more from just talking with the families and gathering data. So, these families from different countries, different backgrounds, cultures, we all communicate pretty much daily on this Facebook group, and we're constantly having these conversations about, does your son do this? Do they have an eye turn? Are they, does his medicine work? Do you have an adverse reaction to this medicine? So we already have this resource that gives you so much information, and now we're putting it in actual data and quantifying it. So it's that much more impactful. But we've learned our children all have eye turns, and the majority of them have it in the same eye. So it's like two great numbers to be a coincidence. A lot of our kids, a lot of our families have had rough labors. It's again beyond coincidence, where there seems to be some correlation between an emergency C-section or difficult labor and having a result of this gene. So we're sort of learning new things every day. Just recently, in the last few months, we've had quite a few new diagnoses, and these families have missense mutations. So it's an entirely different group of mutations than we've ever experienced before, and their children are high functioning. It's almost like a different disease.
What did you learn early on about the state of the research, biomedical research, to treat or find a cure for this particular affliction?
So very early on, as you start reading the papers and publications with CHAMP1, I started calling these doctors, and the majority of them are clinicians. So there wasn't a whole lot of information I can gather. There were two researchers at the beginning in Europe that were still working on CHAMP1, and as nice and helpful and amazing people they are, there wasn't a whole lot they could tell me about as far as treatments go, or that we were very far along in the research process. So from the beginning, we knew that we were pretty much starting from ground one, and it doesn't really translate into a lot of treatment options for our groups. So we're very trying not to get discouraged and trying to push forward to identify any possible method that can result in a meaningful outcome for our group.
At what point in time did you and your family decide to create a foundation, an organization to support the research in the field?
After about a week or two of just being shocked with this news, we immediately started calling people, and I had gotten in touch with this dad who happened to be the founder of another rare disease, and he told me to go to this symposium in Philadelphia from Global Genes. So I'd gotten on a plane. I'm terrified of flying, and not really a big traveler, and I just sort of went on a whim, and I walked into this symposium and this meeting with a bunch of super parents and professionals who sort of laid out what has to be done if this is what you want. And about 3 weeks in, I'd already, on the way home from that plane ride, made a decision that me and my wife were gonna chase this full force and do what we had to do to make a difference.
So you created a foundation, and how long ago was that? And tell us a bit about what the goals of your foundation are.
Sure. So it's been just a little over 2.5 years since we started the foundation. It was April of 2018. So it's been about 2 years, 2.5 years, and the goals we have, the goals for our foundation, it's pretty straightforward. We want to ultimately cure this disease, but in the process, find any possible way to better our kids' lives. So anything that's going to result in a meaningful change, or give my son or these kids the fullest life possible in any way is is the goal. So we're trying to push forward to identify possible treatment options, and we're trying to accelerate this as fast as possible.
Have you been able to find a segment of the scientific community in the United States that is focused on this?
So we were fortunate to pretty early on meet a doctor at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, Dr. Harkin-Arson, and he has taken an interest in our rare disease and is helping working with our community. So we're currently donating samples to his lab so he could he is in the process of developing iPSC cells for our group.
So those are induced pluripotent stem cell and presumably a stem cell line using JJ's cells.
JJ and a lot of the other kids from our community, yes, sir.
So what is your understanding that's going to be done with those cells, and how might they help solve the questions around CHAMP1?
So to my knowledge, he's also looking and getting we have a mouse model at UC Davis, and he's looking and working hand in hand with the iPSC lines and the mouse model to rescue the gene. I know he plans to differentiate neurons and sort of identify the impact that CHAMP1 has in neuronal cells.
Have you been able to see what type of funding is available to support research related to CHAMP1?
Yes, it's extremely, probably the most frustrating part of this is sort of identifying funding mechanisms. And there are a team of researchers in the United States that are working on this cause. And I think funding is the hardest part. I mean, it's them looking into different options from the NIH or various grant resources, or the foundation's responsibility to sort of fill in the gap. And it's not an easy task, even when there isn't a pandemic. So sort of adding the fact that we can't meet people in person, we can't put on fundraisers, it sort of makes it that much more difficult right now.
In the journey, Jeff, early on in patient advocacy, and I'm going back 18 years, I met a fellow by the name of John Walsh, who was someone that suffered from something called alpha-1, which is a lung disorder. And he explained to me when he got started as an advocate, he and two other patients found that there was no funding for this affliction. And they created a very successful organization, the Alpha-1 Foundation, that grew and grew and was able to work with the NIH and researchers to the point where there's robust research into an affliction which was basically unknown at the time. I guess the old adage is the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And that's part of what you are doing, is working with other patients and families around the world to get CHAMP1 recognized as an important affliction for which we should be finding treatments and cures. Are there organizations where families or advocates that are passionate about a rare disease can go to perhaps unite in some way to be heard?
I think how this works for most people is when you start this process of starting an organization or a rare disease advocacy group, you're reaching out to larger foundations who've been there and done that. And I guess one of the different forums where you can go to connect with people and learn more about not only the rare disease process, but as you mentioned earlier, like policies. Global Genes is an amazing organization that connects people, educates groups, almost serves as a pep rally for rare disease to inspire people. And I know I couldn't be more fortunate that was one of the most the first organizations that I was sort of brought into, and then NORD as well.
National
NORD is
Organization for Rare Diseases.
Yeah, National Organization for Rare Diseases. They are also a great resource and tool for learning how to govern your board and learn the policies and sort of the latest laws and developments in drug development. So it's both have served as enormous guides for me, and I know for a lot of other organizations, and sort of set the path forward for new organizations. So there's definitely a criteria, a template to follow, so you're able to know what your next move is and how to get there.
That's great. So what is your vision for your community and for JJ in the next few years?
My vision and my hope is that we're able to see the research sort of develop at a more rapid pace and finally get some answers for our families. I mean, I think every rare disease group and hope is that there's a treatment that's going to come available. Just knowing that that's a possibility is something that's going to refuel our community. So, I mean, ultimately, a treatment option in the next few years is the ultimate goal, if that's possible.
It's my goal to work with you to help identify clinicians and scientists that are interested in this field. I think, seriously, one of the problems you mentioned is the difficulty in securing funding. And of course, in the United States, the greatest engine for funding for biomedical research is the National Institutes of Health. Have you made contact with any of the folks up in Bethesda in the National Institutes of Health to secure their assistance in finding a way to provide more resources for research into CHAMP1?
I have. You mentioned the squeaky wheel gets the the grease. I'm certainly always following that line of being annoying and being persistent and trying not to be too big of a handful. But I've definitely made my voice heard to some people over there. I want to say the difficulty is a lot of it's contingent on the researcher, on their willingness to apply for these grants that are very difficult to get and competitive. And in one of the cases, we have the researcher we have in Europe is willing to collaborate. One of the different places at the NIH is willing to not necessarily use funding, but to collaborate with their team. And it's just a matter of him giving information and willing to work with them. So I'm sort of trying to introduce them, foster that relationship, but it's not always an easy thing, especially when you're, from my end, not giving out dollars here. So it's been a process. It's definitely frustrating, and I hope at some point we're able to catch a break and the doctor I mentioned to you before in Philadelphia. I believe his funding was pulled. Like, they were supposed to give out a lot of these grants in-house, and because COVID had just started, they pulled it. So
persistence,
yeah,
and advocacy, and not be willing to take no for an answer. These are all the hallmarks of successful advocacy. I know you have it, Jeff, and I wish you and your family and JJ all our best. So thank you for doing this interview.
Absolutely. And Bernie, I can't say enough how grateful I am. You've been so kind. You and Alyssa have been so kind, and thank you for doing this and giving us the chance to create some awareness. But you really are just a great guy in general. It was a pleasure to meet you, and thank you.
Thanks for that. To be continued.